Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the final session in day one of Turnkey's Virtual Risk Management Forum. So for those of you that don't already know me, I'm sure you all do, but I'm the most arrogant guy who works for Turnkey. My name's Simon Persson, the Director of Operations and Chief Architect in various different guises. And today, it's not all about me. So I'm delighted to welcome you to this session, which is actually going to be predominantly delivered by Jason Method, our rock star of risk management. So for those of you who don't know Jason, he's had a very long and checkered career across multiple different disciplines. He started off his career in public accounting, would you believe, and then has moved through the consulting ecosystem with a couple of the guys from the Big Four and some of the other consulting partners there. I'm not going to name check all of them. I don't think all of them exist anymore, so it's probably best not to.
So some of them don't.
Absolutely, absolutely. So then moved into the internal audit area, and from there he's taken on responsibilities for risk, assurance in general, and compliance. And I think it was at that point that you decided to call yourself the rock star of risk management, wasn't it, Jason?
Well, I was giving a training, and we were talking as we were doing it, and I said, if I love what I do right now, but if I were to do something else, I'd be a rock star, because I'm a musician. And I thought, well, screw it, I'm just going to be a rock star now too. So I started using kind of that title as well. So
Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So before we hand back to Jason to actually get through to the main course of this particular session, we've got a few admin things to talk through in general. So for everybody who's not joined a Zoom webinar meeting before, just a quick point of order. Hopefully you guys will still already be on mute. I think we've managed to get those sort of controls and security settings locked down, as you'd hope. But just regarding questions, we do want your questions. We want to try to make this into a sort of interactive session within all realms of possibility. But what we are asking is if you have questions throughout, if you can just bang them into the Q&A box in your screens, then that will come through to us as the hosts, and we'll be able to then ask those at the end. So we're not proposing to interrupt Jason's flow as he's going through the session. So we will try and do the Q&A at the end. Again, another point of order, we are recording this session, so that will be available on demand afterwards. So you don't have to worry about making copious notes right as and when you're going through. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy what we've got to offer. So, Jason, you mentioned about the musical link. Obviously, I'm a musician as well with my pastime playing in brass bands, and have done various different things there. So I could not let the opportunity pass to get some sort of musical interlude going in here. Don't worry, I'm not going to play live, but I just wanted to say from the jazzer of GRC, let's hand over to you, the rock star of risk management. So let's see what we're going to cover today. I will leave it over to you.
All right, so yeah, we're gonna go through, and I know that let me go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll get up here and get going, because there's really kind of four areas that we're going to kind of go through, and a lot of what I'm going to talk about probably it's different than what you've heard about before, and the reason for that is you hear a lot of the same stuff from other people, but I want to put a different angle on this that I think most people in our profession don't really understand, kind of the psychological side of decision making and why they're getting told no all the time. So we're going to talk about some of the psychology and bring that into how you can actually start developing a business case that's both cognitive and emotional. And you'll see, a lot of you may be saying emotional. Why are we talking about emotions, right? Well, when we get through the presentation, you're going to see why. Also, how you'll be able to kind of link those efforts to organizational objectives, how important that is, so that you can really get the resources that you need. Because, without those resources, it's hard to do your job. So, to start with, I wanted to kind of go through some common mistakes that people have. And that they do. The first one is, they come up with this great data spreadsheet, ROI calculation, and they just assume that if they put that in front of the decision maker, that it's going to make sense and that they're just going to get the answer. Okay. And it requires much more than that. Sometimes, people are asking before you've actually established influence. And we're going to talk a little bit about influence. We won't go into much of it today if you're already familiar with it, but I'll share with you kind of those 6 principles that Robert Cialdini actually talks about in his book. Another mistake is people are not linking what they're doing to the objectives or what's important to the decision maker. And you'll see when we talk about the psychology why that is so important. Another one that a lot of people will end up making is they don't even put the data together, right? They just are like, hey, we need to do this, so you need to give me the money. Well, that's not going to work. You know, there has to be a mix of both cognitive and emotional. And just to kind of set the stage on this, I want you to imagine just for a minute, you know, you have had a very tough week at work. You've been working long hours, going in early, coming home late. It has been very, very stressful for you. And you get to Friday and you just feel exhausted, okay? You make your way back home and you're just ready to grab a pint, grab a glass of whiskey, something to just relax and kind of let everything go from the week. So you get home and you sit down in your favorite chair and you take that big sigh, you know, and maybe you have your beverage with you, and in walks your teenage child and just walks up to you and says, "Can I have $50?" Now, what's your response going to be? Most likely it's going to be no, right? Okay, that is what we're doing usually when we're asking people for money, okay? That executive that is going to be the one that's going to give you the approval, they're tired, they're burned out, they've got a lot of other things on their mind, and we just effectively walk up and ask them for $50. So if that's the way you're doing it, you're going to get told no most of the time, okay? Now, if the teenager is a little smarter, right, they're going to kind of tailor the argument, if you will, for why the $50 is good for the parent, right? And again, if my kids are all gone now, but if they walked up to me and said, "Can I have $50?" and I'm like, "Why?" "So I can get out of the house," I'm going to be like, "Ooh, that benefits me. All right, go." Right. So some of those things that, you know, to kind of think about. Now, I want to bring up here, and we'll just start talking about some of the psychology for a minute, because, you know, again, a lot of times people, you know, don't realize how important some of this stuff is. So let me share with you a couple of studies that were done to show how emotions really are key to decision making, and it is not the cognitive stuff that we normally think about. So on the left, there was Antonio Damasio from the University of Southern California, which is one of my alma maters. Go Trojans. There was a patient that he had who had lost part of his brain. It was the orbital frontal cortex, and that's the part of the brain that actually connects the frontal lobes with your emotions that we feel in the back of the brain. And so he got this patient, and he thought, "Oh, this is great. With no emotion, this man should be completely logical, should be able to just make logical, rational decisions all the time." But the problem was they actually found that he became paralyzed and he was unable to make even the simplest of decisions. Because that connection with the back of his brain and the front of his brain and the cognitive part was missing, he couldn't actually make a decision. Okay, now Gerald Zaltman from Harvard has said 95% of thinking takes place in our unconscious mind. Now, our unconscious mind is that back part of the brain. I'll show you some numbers later, but it's effectively, you know, what does 90% of the processing. And so what we need to realize is that our emotions are a way that our unconscious communicates with the conscious part of the mind that's actually making the decisions. Okay, so we do need to have emotions, or emotions are a part of our decision-making process. Now, if we move forward to another study that was actually done by the Max Planck Institute in Germany, what they did was they did some experiments where they would give people two buttons, one in the left hand, one in the right hand, and the person was to decide whether they were going to push the left button or the right button. And they hooked these people up to machines, and what they found was that they were able to predict. So brain signals would go off in the back of the brain in that subconscious, unconscious area about 7 seconds before they consciously pressed the button. Okay, so they were able to predict from the brain signals which option the participant would take 7 seconds before they actually made the decision. And so they found, or the conclusion was, that brain activity predicts up to 7 seconds ahead of the time how a person is going to decide. Okay, so here's another tie-in for why our emotions end up having such an important part, or such an important part of our decision making. Okay, so we know that emotions also shape our cognitive world. Everything that is a conscious thought was an unconscious thought before it makes it to our conscious brain. Okay, and our beliefs actually shape our perspective of the world. And so there's these things called cognitive biases, and especially in risk management, these are important for us to realize, because our cognitive biases can actually give us false information. So one of the cognitive biases, for example, is let's say, for example, that you're going out and you're going to buy a new fancy red car. And so you start looking it up online, you do all the research about it, and you're so excited, you go down and you buy that fancy red car. And all of a sudden you notice that there are the same red car driving all over the road. And you never realized before how many red cars were there. That's an example of a cognitive bias. There were exactly the same number of red cars on the road beforehand. You just didn't recognize it because of a cognitive bias. Okay. Now, the amygdala in the back part of our brain is responsible for the flight, and freeze responses. And so what that means is it's really, that's the oldest part of our brain that really is trying to protect us. And so when some stimuli comes to us, in the back of our brain, unconsciously, we say, am I going to fight? Am I going to flight? Or am I going to freeze? Okay. And we start taking action before we actually consciously realize it. And the reason for that is that our brain is trying to protect us. Okay. So again, let's talk just a little bit about the brain, and then we're going to see how this pulls together in doing our business case. Okay. So again, if you think about your brain really as kind of two major parts right now, we'll talk about conscious versus subconscious. We talked before from the Max Planck research that it's approximately 7 seconds between what happens in our subconscious brain actually makes its way to our conscious brain. So we have an unconscious thought based on some stimuli, and it's about 7 seconds later that we actually consciously get that, or it registers and we're conscious of that particular activity. Okay. Now I put a picture here of a man up on an elephant, and you notice the man is small in comparison to the elephant. So we'll just call it 90-10. So this is an analogy to share with you. The man at the top of the elephant represents your conscious part of your brain, which is only about 10% of your brain activity. The elephant is your subconscious brain. It's about 90%. Now, one of the things too that we've learned is there is a significant difference in the processing speed of your brain, of your subconscious versus your unconscious or subconscious brain. Your conscious brain can only process at about 40 bits per second, where your subconscious brain does it at 11 million bits per second. And so again, as you think about this, the elephant underneath you, right, is actually moving and doing what it wants to do at a much quicker pace than what we actually are. And so it's driving much more of what we do, both consciously and unconsciously, than what we actually realize. Okay. So why should we use emotion in the business case? Again, a lot of times we're taught to use the logic, but we really should be focusing more on the emotion. And the reason for that is, again, people are making decisions mainly based on emotion in the back of their brain, even though when they consciously have the thought, they think that they're consciously making it, but they're actually not, right? Again, go back to that Max Planck Institute research. They could see the brain activity in the back, and the decision had been made about 7 seconds before they consciously saw it, okay? And ultimately, each of us, because we're humans, all of our decisions are based on our own self-interest. It goes back to that amygdala part of the brain that we talked about before, that's trying to keep us safe, okay? And so the decisions that we're making, and so when you think about the people making the decisions to give you resources, or the people that you're providing the business case to, you have to realize that they're making a decision that they believe is in their best interest. Now, regardless of how cognitive and analytical they believe that they are being, they are still ultimately driven by emotion in making that decision. Now, another thing that we learn from the brain as well is we fear loss at a 3-to-1 ratio. And what that means is that our brain is constantly scanning and looking for things that we would consider to be dangerous, okay? And we see 3 times as many of those things as we do the positives. And so again, that's why from risk management and psychology, people are more afraid of loss than they are of gain. And so because of that, people are much more willing to take action based on fear of loss than on some hope of some good reward. Okay, that's why people, when you talk about risk and reward, people are freaked out about risk. They care about reward, but not to the same extent. Okay, so we're trying to set some of the basis here for how we're going to start trying to repackage or re-talk about our business case. Now, most of the time, when we're trying to get people to make a decision, we like to talk about features and benefits. Oh, it's going to promote a risk-aware culture. It'll improve efficiency and effectiveness, or break down silos, or it's going to reveal more opportunities for us to create value, or even we get a fancy dashboard. But what I'm going to tell you is, just like Tony Soprano would say, forget about it. The features and benefits by themselves are not going to get you the answer. Why? Because most of those features and benefits are the positives. They're the rewards. And if you remember, fear of loss is a much bigger motivator for people, as we talked about before, from the psychology and the brain activity side. Okay. So one of the things that you can do, here's your first kind of practical tip, is flip the benefit and find the pain, because the benefits themselves will probably not get you the finding. So if we take a couple of these that I had on the previous slide, we'd like to say, hey, it's going to break down silos and provide end-to-end visibility on our risk management program. Well, if you say that, you're probably not going to get as good of a response as if you flip it and say something like this. If we don't find a way to break down these silos, we're going to continue to duplicate efforts and waste time and money. Okay. So the pain there is wasting time and money. Now, no CFO, no CEO wants to waste time and money. So that is going to resonate with them much more than breaking down silos. Okay. You getting where I'm going? Feeling what I'm feeling? Here's another example is, we want to promote a risk-aware culture. Okay, that sounds great, fabulous, utopia, but you're going to get a much better response if you say something instead like, if we don't start integrating our risk efforts, we're going to continue to have risk failures that cost us, and they cost us big. Okay, so at the bottom, I have the reminder to quantify. Even though we're still starting to use emotion and we're flipping the benefit, quantify how much it's costing, right? So to kind of add the punch to the end of that is give them the number. If we're going to continue to duplicate efforts and waste time and money, we're wasting 10,000 hours a year and $2.4 million with all this duplication. When you add that to the end of it, then they're going to really perk up, because then they have an understanding of what it is that you're talking about and how big of a deal it actually is as well. Okay, making sense? So that's kind of the first takeaway. Now, another way to look at this is, again, you're trying to look at what are some of the pain points. And so again, what you should be trying to do is eliminating some of these daily pain points. So again, sometimes you can figure those out by flipping the benefits, but also by looking at where are the pain points within your organization. Are there certain time pressures? Maybe you have to get something done by the end of next quarter. That's a pain point that can your solution or what you're doing help relieve that time pressure. If you've got disparate systems and you really have no overall view of exactly what's going on, can this actually help that? Can it actually help relieve the pain points of things like, limited visibility or accessibility in the system, or maybe reporting, right? And another one that's a big thing that's becoming even bigger is, are there some regulatory or business partner requirements that this would actually help as well, right? Because again, if you go back and you think about our example to begin with, of the teenager coming up and asking for $50, well, the parent has something else on their mind, right? And usually it's related to some of these daily pain points, okay? All right, so here we go. Another thing for you to start thinking about is, how are you going to actually link these things to objectives, okay? And again, this is one of those steps, as I told you to begin with, that a lot of times we're not doing. And this gets back to our, what's in it for the decision maker. Okay, so again, we want to start looking at and make it so that the decision can be based on their self-interest. We know that the people that are going to be approving the business case, giving you the resources, they have objectives that they're supposed to meet, okay? And meeting those objectives is in their self-interest. Why? Because usually there's a bonus, there's a performance appraisal, something that's associated with them actually achieving or meeting their objectives. So we need to start understanding, first off, what are our objectives, but also what are the objectives of the decision maker. Now, if they're the same, then that makes it really much easier for you to align with the decision maker. If they're not the same, then you have to start thinking about, okay, how can meeting my objective also help the decision maker meet their objective? Okay, because what you want to show is that what you're doing benefits the decision maker. So let me tell you a little story about a healthcare company that I worked with. They were having some issues. They kept getting told no. You can't have the money. We don't need that. That's just overhead. Blah 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 blah. Right? They kept getting told no, and so they came to me and they said, we need to we need to get this fixed. And so we sat down and we started talking through, and realized, the CEO was the person that if the CEO was on board with it, that they were going to get the approval. So we started talking about the CEO, asking some of these kinds of questions. And so what ended up happening is, we found out a little bit more about the CEO. And as I dug deeper, I said, what is most important to the CEO? And at first they're like, well, we don't really know, right? So we dig a little bit deeper. And then finally, one of them in the group said, every time our CEO gets up and does any kind of a speech anywhere, even like if it's 2 minutes in front of the employees or it's on an analyst call or anything else, he's always talking about improving the patient experience. Okay, and he's using those terms, improving the patient experience. And so we realized again, okay, now what we've started to understand is What's the objective of the CEO? It's to improve the patient experience. Okay, so how is what you're doing benefiting or improving the patient experience? Okay, so again, not only was the CEO asking this each time or saying this each time that he was speaking, but when people would come to him, right? So again, assume that the CEO is sitting in that chair with his, little glass of whiskey, and you come up and can I have $50? His first question is going to be, how does it improve patient experience? If you can answer that question and you can tailor your business case to that, he's going to easily pull out the $50 and give it to you. Okay. And that's what we found. So we went through, talked about that. They came up with a plan. They went back and used that strategy. And guess what, folks? They got the money because, again, the CEO was able to understand and see how that would actually benefit and improve the patient experience. Okay. Making sense so far? So one of the keys, again, is linking to the objectives of the decision maker. It looks like we did have trying to look at both of them here. Let me got a question that came through too. Whoops.
Yeah, we did have a question, but I was going to hold those back to the end. So
okay, well, we'll hold them back. We'll hold them back.
Jason.
I'll just keep going. It's live.
Yeah.
Here we go. Okay, principles of influence. There's a great book actually called Influence that Robert Cialdini came up with. He did a bunch of scientific research on what it takes to influence other people. Okay, and there were 6 points that he came up with in the original book. They're liking, reciprocity, consensus, authority, consistency, and scarcity. Okay, so I'll go over this just briefly in here because there's that book that's available. I actually even have a couple of other courses on influence, but let me explain to you what they are and how, depending on what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to establish a relationship with somebody, whether you're trying to overcome objections, so overcome other people's objections, or whether you're trying to influence somebody to take a particular action, would depend on which of these principles of influence that you're going to want to focus on first. Okay. So liking, the easiest way to think about that is, you go on Facebook and somebody writes a post and you like it, so you give it a like, right? Liking is just really about liking or relating to another person. Okay. And so again, if like Simon said at the beginning, we're both musicians, right? So we like each other. One reason, because we just happen to be musicians. Okay. It's nothing good or bad, but musicians tend to like other musicians. Why? Because we have something in common. Okay. Reciprocity is the fact that you must first give before you get. Okay. And so a lot of times when people think of reciprocity, they think like a quid pro quo, tit for tat kind of thing. I'll give you something if you give me something in return. That's not what this is talking about. This is more the concept of general reciprocity, or the Incans used to call it Aini, which is the fact that you must give first without expectation of receiving something in return. But when you give to someone in that way, they will feel an obligation to reciprocate to you somehow. It may not be at that time, it may be in the future. And so if you don't have relationships with people, then you want to practice liking and reciprocity to help you in developing a relationship with someone else. Okay. Overcoming objections. This is where, again, you would use the principles of consensus and authority. So think of consensus as kind of social proof. There are other people who are saying that this product works. Testimonials. There are, your friends are giving you recommendations. Okay. That is what consensus is. So the more social proof that you can build up, the more you're going to be able to overcome people's objections. Authority means that they actually see you as an authority in whatever it happens to be that you're doing, right? So if I was going to go in and needed some dental work done, and if I have a choice between somebody who went to maybe a reputable university, is board certified, versus somebody who did his dental work online, I'm probably going to place more authority on the first person than I would on the second person, right? And so again, overcoming objections with the consensus and authority is really helping people realize that you actually know what you're talking about, and that the results or the things that you're talking about actually happen because they've happened to other people. Okay. The last one there was on taking action. So if you're trying to get somebody to take action, the two principles of influence that you want to focus on more is consistency and scarcity. So consistency is getting people to take little steps along the way. Before you go in and ask for $50, you'd ask for something else. Okay. And so you can see this again in certain sales techniques and other things about, for example, getting people to say yes. Okay. That is a sales technique where you ask certain questions that people answer yes to. And once they answer yes 5 or 6 times, then when you ask them the question to buy, they're already used to saying yes to you. And so they're more likely to say yes to you when you ask for the bigger thing. That's what consistency is about. Okay. And again, it can be simple things like questions, but it can also be just kind of consistently showing up, and people see that or get used to what you're doing. Right. So again, if you've proven yourself in the past, so you have the authority and consensus, and you've done it multiple times, you probably also have that consistency as well. Okay. The last one is on scarcity. Scarcity means, this goes back to our fear of loss. If you remember before, a 3-to-1 ratio. If something is scarce or limited, then we know that we have to take action or we might lose out on it. So that's why, again, when you see a lot of things, you're watching late night TV and they're selling knives, only 19 sets left, right? Take action now and you get, it's half price, but it's only half price for the next, until we run out. And, oh, now there's only 18 left. Oh, now there's only 17 left, right? Those are techniques that are developing or showing some scarcity, which is encouraging people to take action, or else they might miss out. Okay. And so again, as you're kind of coming up with some of these things, and even like we talked about before with flipping the benefits, if you show the scarcity or show kind of how much we might lose, that's going to encourage people to actually take more action. Okay. So again, that's a little bit about influence, because if you're asking for something before you've ever developed a relationship with somebody or thought about these principles of influence, you're probably going to get shot down to begin with. And so that's why most of the work actually happens not during the pitch, but all of the stuff before the pitch. Okay, we do still have to calculate ROI though, because again, ultimately somebody's going to need to see the numbers. And the reason for this is you need to realize that other people in the organization are also asking for the money. And so because of that, at the end of the day, if I'm the CFO and I have, maybe I have $10 million that I can spend on certain capital expenditures or investments this year, I'm going to have people come to me probably with $30 to $50 million worth of ideas, but I only have the 10 million to spend. And so because of that, ultimately, again, I'm going to think, if we remember to the beginning, think that I'm being logical and just looking at the numbers, but those are going to be a part of it. And unfortunately, you know, in our area, we don't do as good a job as this as other people do. So story about another CEO in the fashion industry, and his internal audit group, you know, similar to risk management, came to him and said, you know, we want to spend $5,000 on this tool. And his first question was, what's the return on investment? And the head of audit said, well, I don't have that calculated. He said, well, go calculate it and come back to me, and then we'll talk about it again. Okay, so the audit person went away. You know, marketing people came into him and said, hey, we want to go to this fashion show in Milan, and we need $150,000 to do this. And he says, what's the ROI? They said, oh, well, we don't have that. Well, go calculate it, come back to me, and then we'll talk about it. So marketing went away, and about 2 weeks later, they came back to the CEO and said, okay, here's the ROI. If we spend this amount of money, blah, 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 here's what we think it is. CEO said, okay, check, gave him $150,000. The audit person didn't go back to the CEO for 3 years. I don't know why. If they didn't know how to calculate it or what it was, but the person didn't get the money because they didn't calculate the ROI. Okay, so you still have to have some of the analytics with it as well. So how can you do this? Here's some little kind of tips for you to kind of walk away with. Think about risk versus reward. You know, again, especially in risk management, we always like to talk about the risk, but if I'm going to invest money to avoid a risk or mitigate a risk, I need to see the benefit. And I'm not going to invest $1 million to save $500,000 in risk. Okay, that doesn't make sense, right? And so you have to be able to quantify some of that. And I know sometimes, again, it's more difficult sometimes to quantify it, but you can actually quantify it. Talk about it more as an investment and a benefit to the organization instead of just a cost of doing business, because nobody really likes to just have to spend money that they don't get any sort of return for. So some of the benefits, again, are things that you could think of that would be the benefit of making this investment, are things like cost avoidance. Well, could we, you know, not have litigation or fines? You know, if we did this, you know, can we improve our reporting time? And again, that sounds great. It's a great benefit, but kind of flip it and see what the pain is. If our reporting time continues to be a month instead of a week, what are we missing out on as well, right? So you can start to quantify how that improved reporting time is going to benefit. Maybe it's even higher quality reporting. You know, if your reporting is not good, so that your decision makers are waiting or they're making decisions based on bad numbers, again, how is that going to benefit the organization, and how can you quantify that? Go back and maybe think about some decisions that were made before that were the wrong decision because you didn't have the right reporting. See how much it cost you, right? And so again, you can start to see and calculate or come up with an ROI. There's lots of things around efficiencies. You know, things like spending less time, less steps, just improving the operational processes in general. Also, there's usually, you know, some around either reducing headcount or reallocating headcount to higher and better uses as well, okay? And ultimately, again, you need to think about this as kind of a make versus a buy decision in how you're trying to come up with this, because sometimes it's better to, you know, lease or rent than it is to buy. Sometimes it's better to buy something off the shelf versus actually making it yourself, okay? So some practical tips here, and then we'll kind of get into, you know, some Q&A time here at the end. But another practical tip that I didn't really talk to you about before is, you know, a lot of salespeople, when they're trying to get that consistency that we talked about, they try to use yes questions because they want people to say yes to whatever they're selling. Okay. Now, the issue is the problem is that we have become conditioned to, if we say yes, that feels a little risky because I am committing to something. And so people are more comfortable saying no than they are saying yes. So how could that look? Well, traditionally you might say, so, are you ready to make a purchase decision today? Yes, right? You can flip it around and say, is there anything holding you back from buying today? It allows the person to say no, but it's still the answer that you want, but they feel more comfortable actually being able to say the no. Okay. Another one is to provide options. Whenever you're going to make a business case, I suggest that you have between 2 to 4 different options for how you could do this. Because if you go to a decision maker and you only give them one choice and you say, this is the only thing we can do, they feel like they're not the one making the decision. And so providing a couple of different options that would actually work is a much, much better way to kind of go through that. Don't be afraid to use emotion. Show how whatever you're doing actually benefits the other person. Flip the benefits to pain points. So again, as we talked about, because people are afraid of loss more than they are of gain, don't just talk about how utopian the world is going to be, but show how those things actually deal with or stop some of the pain points. Make sure to show the ROI. And then, if you've ever watched the show Shark Tank, where inventors and people with businesses come in and they sit down in front of a panel of venture capitalists. That's the Shark Tank. And so what happens is you're going in, there's lots of people pitching to these people. They only have a limited amount of money, and there's different things that they're obviously going to make their decision on, but a lot of it is based on emotion. And so again, even in watching a show like that, you can see how sometimes it's not necessarily the best idea, but sometimes the best presentation and the emotion behind it that will actually end up getting people the money. And just realize that, again, your CFO may have only $10 million, but they're getting asked for 30, and they have to make a decision on what to do. All right. So with that, I think it's kind of that question time now. So.
Sure. So, first of all, thank you very much, Jason. There's a lot of really good stuff in that. And I think one point that didn't necessarily come through is that making that business case is not just about a consultancy firm like ourselves, where we're trying to get money from a CFO or a CEO of a client. It's also so much more about internal business cases. If you actually want to get what you need done, you still need to go and ask for the money within your own organization. So it's not just about an external trying to release the cash externally from your business. It's about trying to get it for what you need to do your job better or more effectively.
Well, and actually even little hint for everybody, the concepts we talked about, if you use these in your personal relationships too, you'll get more of what you want in your personal and your business life as well.
Let me write that down.
Yeah, because we're still all talking, it's all humans that we're dealing with. So
absolutely. So on to the questions that have been submitted by the delegates, by the participants here. So the first one was actually right back to the beginning about flipping those benefits towards the pain, or at least I think it was. So the exact question was, does this fear of loss as a motivator extend into threats? So is it better to scare people a little bit about the maturity or level of the threat as much as it is just about that kind of fictional loss?
yeah, it is. I mean, it's like I said, I'm a glasses half full. Actually, technically the glass is always full, but we don't have enough time to philosophize about that kind of a person. But unfortunately, the way the human brain is wired, like I said, 3 to 1 is the ratio that just keeps coming up. We don't want to, be a Chicken Little running around with our head cut off kind of a thing. But if you don't talk about some of the pain points a little bit, you're never going to get what you want. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's a bit of a tightrope. You don't want to overly scaremonger and create that kind of paralyzed by fear type of environment, but twisting the knife a little bit and making that real to the buyer is certainly something that has been successful in the past and where we've seen it.
Yep.
So the next one, thinking about leasing versus buying, how do you see the COVID crisis at the moment changing those decisions?
Well, that's an interesting. I mean, it's I'm old enough that I've seen these things come and go. You know, going through a lot of these different cycles. There's, you know, when you think about lease versus buy, it's we've been seeing a trend before this anyway, of a lot of companies really outsourcing everything except their core competencies, right? You know, you take a company like Apple, right? They have effectively outsourced pretty much everything except the design and the marketing for the most part, right?
Mm.
They develop the software too, but all of their devices are pretty much done by other people. We've got companies that are really becoming virtual, and you know, they don't even have an HR or accounting function in-house. All of that is outsourced. Their data centers are now all outsourced, right? So there's a lot of companies that have been moving in this vein anyway. I think this just kind of speeds some of it up because it takes what is normally a fixed cost, right? If I own the building, let's say, that is a fixed cost. If I rent the building, it's variable. And as a result of that, I can more quickly pivot if I need to. So I would think it's going to continue. We'll continue to go down that way, probably more and more. Now that opens up other risks as well, but you know, we don't have enough time to get into all of that today, unfortunately.
Indeed not. And I think this is where we could rock out the whole consultancy answer that says it depends.
Oh,
I
it
think
does.
that as you rightly say, there'll be some elements of the balance sheet that will be beneficial to have a fixed versus variable, or vice versa. But I suppose it depends also if you're looking at sort of security of supply chains. If you're really dependent on externals to provide everything for you, and you're really dependent on like globally shipping products across the world, then clearly that's going to have a massive impact at the moment if some of those supply chains are disrupted. But
Well,
looking at the different criticality, it will come with a very different answer. I don't think it excludes it or encourages it. And
no, and we're seeing some of that now too. You know, one of the things that I heard that I think is true is one of the enemies of risk management is efficiency. And like you said, with the supply chain, whether we're talking about physical inventory, whether we're talking about outsourced resources, you know, in a data center, whether we're talking about even capital, you know, the more of these things that you're kind of outsourcing, and that you're trying to be more and more efficient, so you're running on thin margins, it increases your risk, you
yeah,
know. And I think this COVID time is because I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're like, you know, how come these big companies can't pay their bills? You know, they're multi-billion-dollar companies. What's the problem? And I'm like, do you not realize that most of these multi-billion-dollar companies only have 2 weeks of cash on hand? They've leveraged themselves so much and have their working capital down to where it's just clockwork. And any little thing that does a hiccup in that can actually cause them to go. I mean, there's a great story about GE. We don't have time for it today, but in 2008, Jeff Immelt called up the Treasury Secretary and said, you gotta have the banks loan to us, or we're going to be out of business in 2 weeks. GE. So yeah.
kind of scary, isn't it? Kind of
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah.
But then anyway, moving on from that, we've got a far more, less COVID related question. So how do you overcome the internal conversations of the people with the purse strings that are telling them that the risk management isn't that exciting? In that case, you've lost before you even start. So there's actually another question that we had submitted earlier as well that was along the same kind of line. So if we can consolidate those together,
Yeah.
how do you get people who don't get this stuff to get excited about risk management and see that as value adding rather than a cost overhead to the business?
Well, the first thing is, and this is, I know this is going to sound like heresy to people in risk management, but there are two reasons why organizations do risk management. Either they get it, they understand, that by managing our risk, we become more competitive. We are able to more easily achieve our objectives, and we're doing it for that philosophical reason. If that's the case, and that's truly what's believed in your organization, then you're not going to be having this discussion, right? People at the top get it. They're going to invest in it because they see it as an investment. So if this is kind of what's happening, if they're saying, you know what, this just isn't exciting, this is just compliance. The second reason why organizations are doing risk management is because of the expectations and almost quasi-compliance nature of it. Oh, the board says we have to do risk management. Oh, our lenders say we have to do risk management. The rating companies are asking us if we're doing it. If that's the reason why the organization is doing it, then it's for the compliance point of it. They're going to spend as little money and just check the boxes. And they're going to say, are you doing risk management? Yep, we're following ISO 31000. Great, check, done. And you're not going to get much more than that. So that would be where, again, it's the longer time probably to be able to develop the relationships and educate people of what risk management can do in the long term. But until they really get it that way, you are probably always going to struggle with that. Yep.
Yeah, unfortunately, more of us struggle with some of that than we'd like to admit, but you always come across some, don't you?
Yeah,
So,
you always do.
So just following on from there, how do you deal with that sort of difficult buyer who's always just out to say no and seems to relish saying no?
Flip the question on them. That person likes to say no, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ask them questions so they can say no, but by them saying no, they're actually saying yes to you, right?
Fair enough.
So is there anything holding, is there any reason why you wouldn't give me this money? No. All right, well then let's go. And again, some of it's going to be personality. I'd have to kind of know more about the particular situation, because you almost have to kind of psychoanalyze the people a little bit as you dig into it. Like I was telling you before with the CEO, you have to really understand and kind of know what it is that's driving them, and some of the things like that for why they just default to saying no. And ultimately, again, bring it back. There's some people that are just, they're a pain in the butt, but if you actually develop a relationship with them and use those 6 principles of influence that we talked about, they will come around. It takes time. So again, don't think that, you can do this all in 1 week. Some of these little tips that I showed you will have an impact within a week. But if you're dealing with somebody like that, it's going to take longer to actually develop the relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jason, that was fantastic. So truthfully, thank you very, very much for taking us through that. And certainly your answers to the questions at the end also very, very insightful. And hopefully we've all learned something today that will allow us to be better risk management professionals, and maybe even get some financial backing to make some inroads into that particular world as well.
Yep.
So certainly a topic very, very close to my heart, and hopefully a lot of people on the call will feel the same thing. So that brings us towards the end of this session about building the business case for risk management. Of course, there's a lot more to see and do in the virtual risk management forum. So this recording will be put up into the on-demand area. If you're looking for something to do tonight or later on in your day today, Jason, then please feel free to check out the other on-demand items, content sets that are there. They're definitely worth a look. And so moving on to tomorrow, we've got another full packed agenda. We've got internal ones delivered by Turnkey. So Chris Boyle leading us off with the keynote, talking about identity and access management and what our understanding of that is. Then we move into some more partner sessions with SAP talking, with Norton Rose Fulbright, and also I think we've got PwC later on in the week as well, but we've also got some exciting client delivered sessions with Dirk Tell from Imperial Brands, and of course, Susie from Horizon as well. So lots to look out for tomorrow in the identity space, and then moving on into the week into more of the security enterprise and application and cyber security threats there. So hopefully you'll join us for some of the sessions later on. But until then, that's goodbye from the Rockstar Risk Management and goodbye from me, Simon Persson.
Thanks, everybody.